Hello, everyone. Welcome to Personalization Outbreak Podcast number 13. After an engaging conversation about the evolution of patient experience last week, this week we will talk about the evolution of the student experience in higher education. Our guest today is the Dean of the College of Business at the California State University in Stanislaus, Dr. Tomas Gomez-Arias. Prior to his role as Dean at Stanislaus State, Tomas was the Chief Diversity Officer at St. Mary's College of California, where he also served as the Professor of Marketing and Global Business and the Associate Dean for Faculty and Research at the School of Economics and Business Administration. Along with our co-host, Scott Lacey, Associate Dean for the Colleges of Arts and Sciences at Fairfield University, we will discuss how the cultural demographic shift is influencing higher education and how its diversity know-how can be a valuable asset for corporate America. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Tomas, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks to you, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. We're delighted. And, to give our audience an example of what makes you prepared to lead others and help others in today's age of personalization. You may recall, Tomas, that I recently asked you a question, and the question read like this: when and where do you find your most authentic self? Now, here's how Tomas replied. Listen carefully. I find my most authentic self in the midst of an honest, heated, intellectual argument, one where we can work together to discover a better idea, a better solution, rather than trying to convince each other about the merits of our own positions. That dialogic meeting of the minds brings out the best and truest in me. Tomas, why can't most people be their most authentic selves under these types of conditions? In other words, why do the forces of standardization, in this case, feeling the need to assimilate, limits progress rather than produces abundance?
I think we spend too much time and effort trying to convince others that we are right, that we have some secret formula or some well-known formula that is going to work for everyone, that works for me and is going to work for you and is going to work for someone else, rather than thinking about what is it that really works for you, for me, and what is different that is going to work for us when we have to work together, when we have to live as a community. I'm an academic, so usually I think about an academic of thinkers, a community of learners. What is going to work for us, rather than trying to convince you that I'm right, because maybe I'm not, and definitely I am not right about you. At best, I can be right about me, because that's the experience I have, and that's the only person I can claim to know best.
Well, wise response. But this also brings up some of the limitations that standardization has brought into administration and in leadership. And that is, if I win, you must lose. Mm-hmm. It's almost an environment of intense competition rather than one that invites a healthy level of inclusivity, which now brings me to the second question that I asked you. Now listen to this, everyone, because this also reveals the type of individual that Tomas is. What problems do you enjoy solving for the most? Now, quoting Tomas's response, how can I increase happiness around me? ultimately, this is what I'm passionate about. And most problems at their root are about barriers and enablers to happiness. I perform best when I face urgent and seemingly untractable problems that require a new approach and taking an uncommon kind of risk. Why do you believe, Tomas, that most people are unhappy?
That's the $1 trillion question. Why are people unhappy? But I think it's a role to try to find out what's in the way of people's happiness, and it varies a lot from one individual to another. What really makes them happy, makes them excited, makes them their best, and perform at their best. And very often, what makes us unhappy is in strange areas that we seldom look into. Is not the work. It's not money in most cases. It's something else. It's being fulfilled. It's their relationship with their families and their communities. It's feeling stuck in many cases in a particular path that maybe it's the one that someone else defined for them, or they feel that society defined for them, and they cannot express themselves and be their true selves. You were asking earlier about when someone is their authentic self. And I think very often people cannot be their authentic selves, or they don't feel that they are able or allowed to be themselves and really pursue what, in some of our this country's foundational documents talk about the pursuit of happiness, which I think it's a fantastic turn of phrase from over 200 years ago, and thinking about the right not only to do what you want, but to think about what makes you happy.
It's interesting, Tomas. I've been thinking about this, and we're going to pivot to Scott here in a moment, because he actually teaches a course on happiness at Fairfield University. But think about the situation that we're in right now. I think it's fair to say that for the first time in modern history here in the United States, when the pandemic, when COVID struck hard, first time we've really been in any level of real adversity, something that we couldn't control. And what I've learned in this process, and again, this is just my observations through a series of many phone calls, is that I've learned that many people, they feel hopeless and helpless, not because they can't be, it's because they've never been asked to be. In other words, standardization has put the individual in a position to follow orders, do what they're told. They're boxed in. And when this pandemic started, and then, of course, the social unrest, which in many respects you can say the offshoot of all these things are very much interconnected, people were having trouble having an opinion or thinking of the actions that they can take to be part of the solution. Why? Because directions that they've received from other people have almost stripped away their identity to the point where they don't have an opinion, or they don't know how to act, that they need somebody to push them and to direct them. Why am I sharing this? It seems to me that when that level of your heart and soul is taken out from under you, there's a lot to be unhappy about, especially when you add it onto something that is so uncertain and that is out of your control. So, Scott, I'm going to pivot to you right now. I'd love for you to react to what Tomas said, and also maybe some of the things I just shared.
Yes, I think as soon as you started talking about the individuality of happiness or well-being, however we might want to coin the phrase, the thing that popped out in my mind in terms of the trouble of assuming that one person's recipe for happiness must therefore be happy. Come on, this makes me happy. Do this, you'll be happier. And this is something you're talking about in your own leadership style as well. But when I'm doing this anthropology of happiness class, one of my favorite days is when we look at it's relatively recent, but it's been going on for a while, the World Happiness Report, right? Comes out every year in the spring. And what we see is a mixture, an assessment, a very widespread assessment of about 150 plus different nations. And we're going in there with a similar singular methodology on multiple levels to try to assess where are the happiest people in the world. And when we go ahead and look at that and look at the results, the students are always saying, oh yeah, it makes sense. Look, war-torn countries, or they're making sense of why they're a sad or a less happy country. But then we make the students take a similar test to see where they sit as an individual in relation to this so-called global frame. And what most of them find is that either they're way over happy or way more under happy than they thought they were until they saw it put forth in a different way. So I'd like to do a mini World Happiness Report just with you and ask you a question, because based on your experience in higher ed, you have been in many different countries, not just physically real countries, but also countries. For example, like an Office of Diversity versus a business school. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about this. In terms of leadership, and when you lead with this thought of well-being is the common sort of piece that binds all of your, or much of your strategy, how does that strategy change, or how has your strategy changed when you move to, say, a Office of Diversity to a business school, or even to higher ed in the US versus higher ed, say, in Spain or somewhere else?
Well, I think one of the things I'm trying to dig into is that element of individuality. One of the things we did at St. Mary's when I was Chief Diversity Officer there, and it started before I assumed the position, but we did a lot of work on it while I was there, was trying to gather the voice of the community, gather the voice of the individuals, have reporting systems that would allow us to collect and then disseminate the individual experiences that people were going through, because it was so important. The ability to get that individual experience, and then of course it will have to be anonymized in many cases, etc. But all those instances of sometimes it's just microaggressions, it's something small, and this is something that so many people in the traditionally marginalized communities have been talking about forever, and very often we don't listen. Look, there are the big things that everybody sees in the newspapers and make headlines. But there's so many things that is day after day after day after day. It's sometimes hour after hour. It's not one person, it's one and another and another and another. And they make a difference. They make a huge difference in our lives. And being able to collect some of those and be able to act on certain patterns that appear was really important. The same thing as a business did. Now that I have been in this position for the last 3 years or so, and at a very different institution, is trying to look at what are the needs of the individual students and the communities that we serve, rather than try to take a cookie cutter approach to okay, well, this is a very standardized curriculum, and here it goes. Thinking about students, faculty, staff, what do they need? What do we need to standardize what faculty members do in a class? Or should we actually encourage them to work to wherever are their own strengths and their own passions? Because that's what they are going to perform the best, and the students are going to see it. They are going to notice it. When I interview candidates, we are recruiting faculty, for example, and they are asking me about what are the research expectations that we have, and Scott has that experience too. And their eyes open when I tell them, I want you to do your best research. I really do. And I don't care too much about 3 or 4 or 5 narrowly defined journals where you have to publish. I want you to do your best research. And if that means going or straying away from your core discipline, so be it. If that means collaborating with people outside your discipline, so be it. If that means publishing in outlets that I have seldom seen in my discipline because they work with someone else, so be it. But I want you to be your best research and what makes you tick, what you are really passionate about. And the same things with students. I sometimes I talk to them and they ask me, what first year students very often ask this, what major should I choose? Because my parents are telling me, well, think about accounting, you're going to get a job. And okay, what do you like? Well, I like English. I like writing. I like reading. Study English. Study literature. Do whatever you are passionate about. If you are passionate about it, you're going to be good at it because you will put the effort, you will put the emphasis on it, you will be able to dedicate the time, and you will be good. If you are good at whatever you are, you will be fine. You will find the job. I have an alum who ended up working. He translates classic Aramaic. And he got a degree in business. He was very frustrated with it, but his passion was in classical Middle Eastern languages, and that's where he eventually grew. He got a master's degree. He went to Cambridge. That was his passion. So that's what I tell them: follow your passion. What really makes you tick, and you will be fine. If you are really good at it, you will be fine.
You know, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I have one follow-up on that, just from, as a sort of middle level dean here, as opposed to a dean that's running a whole shop. I can get it, and I get it as an individual, especially as somebody that's trying to help new faculty and students and even student life and all these awesome people that are around us in the university system, right? Trying to make the best of this experience for faculty, for staff, for students, for everyone. But while I can see, and I try to see the same exact ideas that you do, sometimes I find that it's very hard to actually activate that I can give these good words and make people feel good, but I sometimes see structural impediments to that. As somebody that's been doing this for a bit longer, what have you done structurally to help make your institutions open to the idea that, yeah, you don't have to publish in those journals that everyone else has to publish in, and you can trust me because you are going to get promoted, you are going to have your job. What have you had to do? Have you had to change rank and tenure? Have you had to change admittance policies, criteria?
Well, in our case, fortunately, even before I arrived, the institution was really open to it. Their criteria for promotion and tenure were relatively open, and we are accredited. We are an accredited business school, so we do everything. But it fits within our own definitions for accreditation. So we make sure that we have that, and I have kept enforcing that, reinforcing that, because I think it's important, and that goes to the element of not only the individual, but the collective, the smaller communities where we operate. When you have, if you are alone in the community, if you are going against everybody else, you are in trouble. But that's where it's important to choose where you work and the people that surrounds you. Because when I came here, I came from a fantastic place, and Mary's College was a fantastic institution, a great mission, and a fantastic group of colleagues there. But then here at Stan State, I have a group of colleagues who really get it, who really understand that the focus on the student is so important, on the individuality of the student, who understand that it's so important to nurture our junior colleagues and taking them through the process of promotion, tenure and promotion, and make sure they get that support, and they support policies that also nurture that faculty with criteria that allow that freedom to work in the areas where they really want, where they are really passionate, rather than trying to straitjacket people into very, very narrow fields.
So a couple of things, Tomas, just so we can get our audience understanding a little bit better of what it is that you're doing. Number one, how long has Stanislaus State been in existence?
Stanislaus State is 60-year-old university.
60. And what are the demographics, student demographics?
For those of you who are not familiar with California and higher education, Stanislaus State, or California State University Stanislaus, that's our full name, is one of the campuses of the California State University system, which is one of the 3 higher education public systems in California. There's the University of California system. Those are the doctoral institutions. There's the California State University system. These are the teaching institutions. And then there's the community college system. And within the California State University system, we are placed in one of the most disadvantaged areas of California. When we think about California, we think about San Francisco and Los Angeles. We are in the Central Valley, agricultural area, manufacturing area, distribution area, far away from the coast. Our student body is over 50% Hispanic. Of our students are the vast majority, over 70-75% of our students are the first ones in their families. They are first generation students, the first ones in their families to have access to higher education. Most of them, about 2/3 of our students, are, and then this is higher education lingo, Pell eligible. These are the students who are the poorest by federal standards. Usually what we translate is these are the students who would have received free lunches in elementary and high school. That's the student body that we work with, and the student body that we are passionate about.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about this, because clearly your institution, Tomas, represents the cultural demographic shift in the United States. Again, what happens, let me define the term. It's what happens when large cultural segments of the population reach numbers sufficient enough to have a significant effect on what we do and how we act. If I can take the conversation back to where it started, everything about your leadership, the importance of authenticity, the importance of being happy because you can be authentic. This is at the core of what your student population is looking for. I mean, the fact that you are leading and your team is leading in a way that aligns with the mindset and the need of a student body of Hispanics that represent over 50% of the population, the student population. This is, I believe, where universities and colleges want to go. They need to prepare themselves more for this demographic. How would you advise a university that historically has had a very small percentage of Hispanics as part of their student body, and that by default, whether they like it or not, here they come. What should they be doing now to prepare for them? Because the type of leadership that you are representing, I believe, is what's required in today's age of personalization. It's less about what the institution thinks the student needs to learn and more about what the student hopes to learn.
There is something that I have been repeating for a number of years. I'm originally from Spain, the old world, and not that the Americas are not old. They have been. But there's a tradition of universities that goes back 1,000 years or so. Right? I have worked at institutions and lectured at institutions that have foundational charters from the 1200s and the 1500s. And we have continued in that tradition here in the US. And today, in the 21st century, what we are seeing is that we are institutions that are absolutely fantastic, but are prepared for a student that doesn't exist, or that doesn't exist anymore. Right? We are prepared for an 18-year-old boy who can take 4 years out of his life to live the life of the mind and then move on to do something else. That student doesn't exist, or it's a very small minority in higher education today. Our students are all over the place. You were talking about demographic. You were talking about Hispanics, which is a growing demographic, but even within Hispanics, there's a huge diversity. Thinking about them as a single block and all just like each other, it's a mistake. They are very different from each other.
Yeah.
We at most of our institutions, Scott, I imagine that your institution is like mine. We have more women than men among our especially our undergraduate student body and many of our graduate. Mm-hmm. Less and less of our students are full-time students. And even those that seem full-time students, they are not. They are really not. They have families. They are working. At the very least part-time, many of them actually working full-time, some of them several jobs. They are maintaining their parents in many cases. They don't have their parents paying for them and to take 4 years for their education. They are thinking about pathways towards graduation that don't necessarily fit the 4-year bachelor's degree with 8 semesters where you just take course. They are different. That student that goes straight 4 years, dedicating themselves full time to higher education, that's an increasingly scarce student. It's not the norm, not anymore. For many of our institutions, it hasn't been the norm for a while, but we still think in many ways in terms of that student. We still, in many institutions, we still talk about freshmen, sophomore, junior, and seniors, or first year, second, third, and fourth. Well, that's not the path for many students. First, second, third doesn't mean that much. I'm progressing in my study.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's the switch that we have to make in higher education, to think about students as starting a journey and going through a journey through higher education, where they are developing professionally, personally, spiritually, morally, ethically, from a community perspective, and we are partners with them in that journey, right? And I think that's the change we need in higher education.
Can I ask you about one of these possible changes? And I'll make it quick. Is the major, like a student's major, undergraduate major, is that dead? When we look forward, when we look at the transformation, because we're seeing this challenge, right, of the cultural demographic shift, we're seeing the challenge of COVID, and we're seeing a lot of challenges to higher ed that we need to think about. But when we think with the student-centered approach, I'm wondering if the college major is dead. Because I see students coming in rushing to declare one just to make themselves feel better, only to find that they need to switch it 6 months later, and then it just sets off this thing. I don't know. What do you think?
I think what is dead is a distinction between general education and major.
Okay. Yeah. Talk to us more about this. What about that is distinct? Because that's, I think we're on the same page, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Exactly. So I think having a specific interest, which can be a very narrow interest, is useful for the student coming in because it focuses their mind and their efforts, and it helps them discover maybe what they shouldn't be dedicating themselves to. And the earlier they discover that, the better it's going to be for them. But I think in many institutions, and at least that has been my experience at many institutions that either I have worked in or I'm a very active reviewer within our accreditation agency. So I'm exposed to many other institutions. There's very often a very stark distinction between general education, this is one thing, and there's your major. And they are not fully integrated. In our documents, we always say, well, our bachelor degree is an integrated course of education that includes elements of general education, yada, yada. But from the perspective of the students, and really from the perspective of most faculty and even administrators, they are two different worlds. We could just split, okay, spend 2 years doing general education, get rid of it, and focus on your major and have it at two different institutions. And probably we could be fine. But I think the richness is when they are really integrated, when they are part of that intellectual exploration, that intellectual journey, and that professional journey that the student engages in during their higher education time. And that's where I think we are missing that connection. Why is this ethnic studies course that I have to take, right? Why, or that multicultural requirement, or the foreign language requirement? Well, I want to be an accountant, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to be a dancer. Why do I care? What does it have to do? It doesn't permeate, and vice versa. How is this? I don't know. Why is this zoology course? I'm a zoology, all right. So I chose the wrong major to pronounce. Zoology major. I'm taking this course in exotic species or mammals or reptiles.
Yeah.
How does this make me a broadly educated individual? How does this connect me not only to a very narrow passion that I have for whatever lizards, for example? How does this connect me to the wider world in which I live and helps me be a mature, educated citizen?
You know what, Tomas? Just really quick, I just wanted to let you know that you just took me back to when I was in school at the university. And, oftentimes I've been asked many times by young professionals or people that are thinking about going to school and, what are the benefits and what did you learn? And I can tell you this honestly. My degree was in political science, international relations. And because my father told me that there's two things that you really need to know how to do well in life: the ability to write and the ability to speak. And that's actually what drove me to get that degree. But what I really learned, and by the way, it's helped me in my career, believe it or not, because of my international business experience. But what I really learned, and I think this is still important, is that it taught me how to do the things that I didn't enjoy doing. So when you talked about zoology, I can remember taking an astronomy class that I really wasn't interested in. I was horrible at biology. But you know what it did? It forced me to do something that I didn't enjoy doing. And that's life. In other words, in life, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I'm saying that in general, for me, my college experience was doing things I really didn't enjoy doing until it got into things that had to do with leadership. But it made me realize that to be a great leader, you have to learn how to do things that you don't enjoy doing, which brings me back to our conversation about what we're dealing with right now with COVID and social unrest. How prepared is higher education leadership with this massive reset button that has taken our thinking about the 2034 or the 2024 plan and has pushed it into 2020? How ready are we to do the things that we don't like doing? How's that for a bridge?
That's a question, and there's lots of higher education leadership. We have I don't know, including community colleges, we have about 4,000 institutions of higher education in this country, and quite a few of our presidents and provosts and our fellow deans, they get it. They understand it, and they are working on that, on working towards that transition to serving the students that we actually have. And some of our institutions have made more progress than others. There's a lot of inertia in higher education, like in so many other institutions. But change is happening. It's never enough, and I'm one of those who gets very frustrated sometimes. But that cannot get in the way of making progress. Just because it's not enough change, that doesn't mean we have to fight that change. Let's continue moving one step at a time. But we have visionary leadership in some of our institutions of higher education, maybe I can talk about my my boss's boss. We are an institution where all our cabinet, the president, all the VPs, they are all female. Now that's rare at an institution of higher education in this country, but it's not the only one. We are not the only one. We have presidents that are coming from more and more diverse backgrounds. We used to have a certain path to the presidency. Right? Yeah. You were a professor, and eventually you would become a department chair, and you would become a dean, and then you become a provost, and you would become a president. We are having much more diverse presidents now. We have presidents who come from student affairs, from directly serving students rather than the more academic and curricular side of the house. We have presidents that come from industry and take a very different approach to higher education and how it relates to the communities we serve. We have presidents that, and this is going to be really important over the next few years, who come from the CFO suite, as chief financial officers and vice presidents for business and finance, and are able to have a different perspective in terms of our budgets, because ultimately strategic plans translate into budgets, right? And if we don't manage our resources from that perspective, we are not going to get anything done. And this diversity of presidents that we have now, and that diversity is increasing. And Scott and I, who come from the traditional route as academics into chairs, into dean offices, we may see it as a strange process, but I think it's a healthy one for our institutions when we have that different kind of leadership who can see our institutions from that different perspective.
And it seems like we're talking about cognitive diversity here, right? That it's not just about certain checkboxes of who we need to have in the president's seat and certain checkboxes of who we need to have around the table. Those are very important, and we need to think about that side of inclusivity. But what you're speaking to is something that I truly value, and that is cognitive diversity, and that is people coming from all different types of backgrounds. And so for the university to be able to transition and to move into a phase in which we can break down traditional barriers to college and university leadership. I couldn't think of anything more exciting. So question, as these barriers break down in terms of the conventional path to the presidency, let alone a dean's office, can you tell me, just crystal ball time, think 10 years from now as that's gotten a little bit more pervasive across higher ed? Because I see it too. But 10 years from now, what are 2 ways that universities are different because of this cognitive diversity that's coming into leadership?
I think, well, I don't know where I put my crystal ball. I should look for it. I haven't used it in a while. But I think we are going to see 2 things, 2 changes. One is that the merging of the different aspects of the university experience in a different way. Right now, we have the curriculum on one side, and very often all other experiences on a different side. For residential campuses, that's residential life. It may be advising, that can be relatively separate from the curriculum. It tends to be quite separated. I think we are going to move towards a more integrated understanding of the university experience, of the college experience for our students. I think that's one of the changes, and I think it's going to be an important one as it happens. And the fact that we have this different kind of leadership is going to help with that. The other one is a different kind of integration. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. As I said, my crystal ball is kind of blurred right now. But it is a different kind of integration between what is the degree and the post-degree and continuing education. We are not 4 years or bachelor's degrees and you are done with your education. We, as institutions of higher education, we have a lot to say about what happens beyond the bachelor's degree, other sorts of education that companies and other institutions, other organizations need, as they need to skill and reskill and upskill their workforces and our communities and societies. It's not only about employment. It's about our communities at large. How can we elevate the intellectual and cognitive skills of the communities that we serve? Right?
So how does higher...
The bachelor and other things, the degree and the non-degree, I think that's going to blur.
So how do you see higher education integrating more with corporate America, with their communities? How is because what I'm hearing, and as I've been speaking to other deans from higher education, it's clear to me that higher education is no longer going to be viewed as a vertical, but now a horizontal. It touches many things that it should have been touching a long time ago. I mean, how can we better partner as higher education institutions with corporate America and the community?
You said the word. It's partnering, is getting in our relationship with them. Some institutions are doing it very well. They do a lot of in-house programming for corporations and other institutions. They have large executive education programs and open university programs and so on. More of us have to get engaged in that. And I think one of the main barriers we have is for institutions, to some extent like ours, that haven't done that for forever. Since our birth, we haven't really done much about that. How can we show evidence of our value to those organizations and our institutions? How can we prove what we can contribute to them? Because for for many of our institutions at the undergraduate level, the traditional degree programs, we have certain areas. Most education is really local. We talk about the college experience going to a different state, but most people have their college education within commuting distance. Even if they live on campus, they come from 75 miles around. But when we are talking about those other educational levels and options and so on, the communities have their choices. They can, and especially with the technology that we have, an organization that is next door to me can call Scott and say, well, can you prepare something for me? And they can serve them. They have no problem with that. So we have to really justify why we have to be the ones trusted to provide us.
So I'm going to give you a tip right now. Here it is. Number one, corporate America. And when I say corporate America, I'm not just talking Fortune 500s. Businesses throughout the country, businesses throughout California, or even outside of California, more so. How can Stanislaus be a talent pipeline for all these diverse populations that you have been essentially raising and or partnering with over the years that those students are at your institution? Companies want to know more about those populations. They want to know how to lead them. They want to know how to help give them a career path. Let me make one thing clear. When a diverse population graduates and is ready to go to corporate America, the understanding level of these students and what they can distinctly bring to those businesses, if the baseline is 0, the understanding is at negative 20. You have an opportunity to help organizations through your own learnings as you're co-designing and partnering with these student demographics, is to help these organizations understand how to get them at baseline so that they can begin utilizing their distinct skills and traits and attributes immediately. I say this because this gap between negative 20 and 0, that's a major barrier to how these student populations that you've worked so hard, to help prepare for their futures, how that momentum becomes lost because the organizations that are trying to hire them, they don't know them as individuals. And what they force them to do that sets them back even more is to assimilate. So my point is, you have a lot to offer as a case study, and not just case study, but to teach these companies what they can begin valuing and seeing differently for especially these new generations that are more culturally and ethnically diverse than ever before. That's an opportunity for someone like your institution, I would imagine, Tomas.
Well, absolutely. There's a great opportunity to, more than teach. I hate the word teaching. I really do. When I was writing my documentation for promotion for tenure, I scratched down the word teaching philosophy and I wrote learning philosophy.
I like
because
that.
it doesn't matter what we teach. What matters is what people learn. That's what really.
I'm sorry. How about if I said create awareness for them?
So I think where we can serve a role is in helping institutions learn how diversity is important to them, how working with these populations that they haven't really been exposed to, even if they have had a diversity of employees in their organization, they have been ignoring them in many cases. They could have a large percentage of African American employees or Hispanic employees or Latino employees or Native American employees, and they are still a predominantly white institution because institutionally that's what they are. and they have to learn. We are talking about learning organizations, and many organizations they have to learn how that is going to work for themselves. Not what I tell them that is going to work. I'm just Tomas, and I'm just a dean at a university in California, and yes, I have written a few papers here and there, and but that doesn't matter. What matters to organizations is that they discover what is going to work for them. Why there is not only there's a moral argument for the inclusion of all these populations that have been neglected for so long, but there's also a business proposition for it. And we started talking about happiness. There is a happiness proposition for
I like that.
having everyone, and I mean everyone, including and in the development of the organization, in making the organization the very best, and making it a learning and ultimately happy organization where people can contribute their best, right? Which is one of the definitions of social justice in the end. It's creating the situation, the environment where people can contribute their best to society. Is not where people can take the most from society, but it's where situation where they can contribute their own best to society and to the community and to the organization where they are.
You know, Tomas, I couldn't agree with you more. And as we start to close and wrap this up, part of what I'm taking away from this is that, how we move forward needs to be different. And how we move forward is going to require, as Scott is a big fan of, a different level of interdependence and interconnectedness between higher education, its current model, how the student helps influence what it looks like in the immediate future, but also how higher education can play a greater role, a more broader role, not just with businesses, but the role that it plays in its community, but also in creating let's call it a rhythm for how we want that student experience to be, that it doesn't have to be 4 years. It took me 5. And the whole point is that, everybody has a different path. And we have to respect that, especially with all the mass variances that we have in people. I mean, I'd love to say that I was a great student. I studied so hard. And I come to learn, as my dad told me, that what you learned how to do is to discipline yourself to do the things, again, that you don't like doing. So I appreciate the perspectives that you shared. Scott, did you have some closing comments before we give this back to Tomas for some closing remarks?
I do, and it's basically, I'm going to walk the Tomas walk right now, and I'm going to leave the institutional perspective behind and go to the individual. And I'd like to just underscore what I've learned today in terms of understanding your ethos as a leader and as a leader in higher ed. And I think that what my observation is, what your power source is your crystal ball that you shared with us. You said it's cloudy, and you almost intimated that was a problem, but that's your strength. Because, we started off this conversation about happiness and the pursuit of happiness. It's not that those grand old documents guarantee a right to happiness. They guarantee the right to happiness, the pursuit to happiness, I should say, right? And so when you have a cloudy crystal ball, that's me saying as a leader, you are trajectory focused, not destination focused. That you're about the journey, not the destination. And I'm not using those words to be sort of pop culture fun here. I'm literally saying that you're helping to organize minds and activities that are human and personalized, because it's about the human experience moving through to something. The second we put all of our money and all of our interest and all of our mission on some external trajectory or external destination, whether that's for an institution or for a person or for the collective society, that's when we've lost, because all we're going to do is realize that our pursuit of happiness isn't going to happen, because it's over there, and it's going to take us a long time to get there. And so, my dear friend, I just want to say thank you because you helped me understand the critical importance of a crystal ball that is cloudy, because it gives you the space to understand the importance of the trajectory and the not unimportance, but the lesser importance of final destination. So thank you.
Tomas?
Thanks to you, Scott, and thanks to you, Glenn. And my students have heard me say this a million times. No plan has ever gone according to plan. And I think what's important is that when we think about the future, when we think about planning, when we think about education, it doesn't define the future. It gets you ready for that life journey that you are into. It allows you to be ready to face the changes that are going to happen around you. The changes in demographics, the changes in cultural attitudes, the changes in your own life and perspective. If 30 years ago someone had told me that I would be the dean of a business school in the California State University system in the Central Valley, I would have asked them to tell me what they were smoking, because it must have been really, really good. And I think many of us have that experience. Our life path has been incredibly different from what we planned, much less what someone else planned for us. Our families or our parents or our mentors, right? And I think that's really the role of education and of higher education in getting people ready for that journey that is cloudy, that is unknown, that we don't know what we are going to do tomorrow, much less 4 years or 20 years from today. But we get ready for that process.
Well, Tomas, again, thank you so much for your time. And as I always say when I close a show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Keep pushing, Tomas. We need your leadership. Thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Thanks to you, Glenn.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.